Hey guys, tonight we slip into rough straw bedding, surrounded by fleas and judgment. You're a medieval woman now, and you probably won't survive this. The candlelight flickers low, casting twisted shadows on the uneven stone walls of your tiny cottage. You lie flat on your scratchy straw mat, sharing space with your younger siblings, a few beetles, and the overwhelming scent of turnip stew. Welcome to your life as a woman in the Middle Ages, equal parts bleak, backbreaking, and bizarre. Outside, the village dogs bark at something they'll forget in 5 seconds. You roll over, careful not to bump your aching side. There's no mattress here, no privacy, no antibiotics. And the last time you laughed, your neighbor whispered that joyfulness in women leads to sin. So, that's fun. You're born into a world where your existence is mostly framed by what you can endure. Everything about your life, from your chores to your clothes, to the church sermons you sit through on splintery benches, screams one thing: stay small, stay silent, and above all, stay in line. And if you're thinking, okay, but at least there's community, right? Sure. If by community you mean a collection of malnourished villagers who will absolutely rat you out if they see you gathering herbs on a full moon. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I love hearing where you're tuning in from. Drop your country and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to early dawn in a peasant cottage, smoke curling lazily from the hearth, your mother already moving in the gloom. She's stirring a pot of thin porridge while shooing a chicken out the door with the same movement. You're maybe 6, maybe 7. Honestly, you're not sure. Birth records aren't a thing for people like you. Historians still argue whether most medieval peasants even knew their exact age. From this moment forward, your childhood is basically a countdown to usefulness. You're expected to help around the house, and play is something that might involve chasing escaped pigs or pulling burrs from your sister's hair. Toys. If you're lucky, a carved wooden doll that smells vaguely like old soup. School. That's for boys. Well, some boys, mostly sons of nobles or clergy. You, on the other hand, are learning how to knead bread, mend socks, and keep your little brother alive while your mother births another sibling in the corner. No epidural, just a midwife who swears by garlic and whispering to saints. One mainstream historical fact: most peasant girls in medieval Europe began working around age 7, taking on chores like spinning wool, tending animals, or gathering firewood. And by chores, we don't mean making your bed. We mean hauling water from a frozen stream half a mile away and hoping you don't slip and split your skull. There's very little protection for you, physically or emotionally. If your father dies, your family might lose its home. If your mother dies, you're expected to step up, regardless of whether you've hit puberty or still believe clouds are made of flour. And if you get sick, there's a solid chance the remedy will involve beetles, vinegar, or prayer. Sometimes all three. A fringe tidbit. In parts of rural England, it was believed that if a girl swept the house after sunset, she'd never marry. Sounds like a win, honestly. But even amid all this, there's a strange rhythm to life. You memorize the church bells, the clink of your mother's ladle, the cadence of prayers muttered under breath. You find tiny joys, watching geese waddle through the mud, tracing shapes in ash on the hearthstones, stealing a dried plum from your father's satchel, and hiding it beneath your blanket like treasure. Still, there's always the looming threat of what comes next. Your aunt whispers about a girl from 2 villages over, only 10 and already promised to a blacksmith old enough to be her grandfather. You don't understand all the words, but you understand the look in her eyes. It's the same look your mother had last week when she burned her hand and didn't even flinch. Just resignation. So you grow up fast. Your body is still soft, but your hands are already calloused. You learn that crying makes your chores harder, not easier. You watch the women around you go from girls to wives to mothers to graves, all before 40, and somewhere inside you, a voice starts to whisper, "Is this really it?" But you don't say that aloud, ever. Not unless you want to be called ungrateful or troubled. You know better. And besides, you don't have time to think. There's a fire to stoke, bread to knead, water to carry, and another day of invisible labor waiting to swallow you whole. You're maybe 8 now. Your arms ache more days than they don't, and your feet are rough from chasing geese barefoot through nettle patches. You're small, but strong in that wiry way that comes from lifting buckets and surviving on gruel. You're no longer the littlest girl in the house. Your baby sister has taken that crown, and with it comes even more responsibility. Girlhood, if you could ever call it that, ends the moment your hands can grip a broom. Each morning starts with tasks. Sweep the floor, which is just packed dirt scattered with rushes and chicken droppings. Stir the pot of pottage, a bland mix of root vegetables and yesterday's regrets. If your family is slightly better off, maybe there's a bit of barley in there. If not, it's turnips all the way down. By mid-morning, you're already checking off tasks, fetching water, picking herbs, chasing the neighbor's goat out of your cabbage patch again. And the worst part, everyone expects you to do it with a cheerful heart and modest posture. Don't talk too loud, you'll scare off a suitor. Don't laugh too much, it's unladylike. Don't run, you'll tear your hem. You start to feel like existing is a complicated etiquette puzzle with punishments for every misstep. In most medieval societies, girls were trained from an early age for domestic duties. This was seen as preparation for their inevitable futures as wives and mothers. Formal education for girls was rare unless they entered a convent, and even then, it was often limited to reading religious texts and learning embroidery. But let's pause on the idea of marriage for a second. Because while you're still playing with twigs and whispering stories into your sleeve, there's a real possibility your future husband has already been selected, probably by your father and the guy's cousin after they shared a bucket of ale. Age gaps? Oh, they're not only normal, they're expected. You might be married off at 12, 13, sometimes younger, depending on the region. Historians still argue whether this was more common among nobility or peasants, but it happened across all classes, especially if land, alliances, or cows were involved. And once you're betrothed, that's it. No finding yourself, no gap year to travel. You might not even meet the guy until the wedding day. If he smells like onions and has 3 teeth left, tough. That's your guy now. Meanwhile, you're still trying to figure out how to keep your linen shift from falling off your shoulder. Not because it's seductive, oh no, but because if Brother Matthew catches you looking immodest, he might report you to the priest. And then it's public penance, which means standing barefoot outside the church in the cold, while everyone pretends not to stare too hard. Oh, and you're constantly being told stories of saints, female saints, which sounds empowering, until you realize most of them died in horrible ways after refusing marriage or suffering with grace. You're supposed to model yourself after these women. You, too, should welcome hardship with a smile and die piously. But your brain keeps rebelling. You wonder what it would be like to run through the woods without anyone watching, to speak loudly, to say no. In certain parts of medieval France, girls were warned that if they combed their hair on Fridays, they'd summon demons. Honestly, that might be more fun than some of your chores. Your only real breaks come during village festivals, harvest time, feast days, maybe a maypole if you're lucky. But even then, you're still working. Making bread, serving food, sweeping after the boys who get to play mock battles and toss sticks like warriors. You get to dance for about 2 songs before your uncle tells you to sit down and stop making a show of yourself. You live in a body that is becoming more visible each day, and with that visibility comes danger. Already, you notice the way some of the older men glance at you, how they joke in ways you don't fully understand. Your mother starts watching you more closely. She warns you not to go anywhere alone. Not the well, not the woods, not even to fetch kindling behind the house. Your whole life becomes about managing risk. Is your dress too short? Your hair too long? Did you smile too long at the baker's son? There's a constant thread of fear running through everything, and you've learned not to tug on it. The irony, you're still a child, but no one's treating you like one anymore. Not really. You're old enough to carry buckets, to tend sheep, to avoid eye contact with drunk men. And so, apparently, you're old enough to marry. And as you lie down at night, back sore from leaning over the hearth all day, you wonder what's coming next. You overheard something about sending you to live with your uncle's wife, a polite way of saying they're prepping you for marriage. Your stomach knots, your hands tremble. But you don't cry. Crying takes energy. Energy you don't have. Instead, you stare at the thatched roof above your head, count the knots in the wood, and think, maybe if I'm really quiet, they'll forget I'm here. You're about 11 now, when the strange pains begin. Dull aches in your lower belly. Your chest feels sore, your limbs gangly and out of place, like they belong to someone else. Then, one day, it happens. You wake up sticky, ashamed, and a little terrified, because no one told you what to expect. There's blood on the straw bedding. Your shift is stained. Your mother just nods grimly and says, "You're a woman now. You wish you weren't." There's no celebration, no candlelit ceremony or encouraging talk. Just a quick scrub at the water barrel behind the house, a scratchy cloth shoved into your hand, and instructions not to let anyone, especially men, see the rags drying by the hearth. Because menstruation isn't just inconvenient in the Middle Ages, it's suspicious. In many parts of medieval Europe, menstruating women were considered spiritually and physically unclean. The church taught that a woman's bleeding was a symbol of Eve's sin. Some priests even forbade women from taking communion while on their period, as if you needed another reason to feel like your body is a crime scene. You're told not to sit on cold stones. It might make your womb freeze. Don't eat cucumbers or eel. Definitely don't dance. That could dislodge your uterus. These aren't old wives' tales. They're genuine beliefs handed down from actual medieval physicians. Some 13th century medical texts recommended burning a toad, grinding it into powder, and wearing it around your neck to ease period cramps. Why a toad? Who knows? Historians still argue whether that was metaphor, medicine, or just another way to humiliate women. Puberty hits you like a plague cart. Your body changes, but there's no guidance, no sympathy, only rules. You must keep clean, but not too clean. Because frequent bathing is sinful, obviously. You must cover your head in church and keep your eyes low. You must walk carefully so that your new curves don't invite trouble. Trouble, of course, means men. And the older you get, the more you're taught that their behavior is your responsibility. Your uncle leers at you during dinner. Don't wear that belt so tight. The blacksmith's son makes a crude joke when you pass. Don't smile so much. You're only 12, and you're already being blamed for other people's behavior. That little carved doll you used to play with? It's in a basket now, half buried under onions and wool scraps. There's no time for games. You're bleeding, your hips are widening, and your mother has started measuring your height with a piece of twine. It's not for fun, it's to judge how marriageable you look. Because now, every village gossip, every festival dance, every trip to the well is potential matchmaking bait. You're paraded like a prize lamb. Aunt Marjorie whispers about a miller's son who needs a young, firm wife. You're not sure what that means, but it doesn't sound great. And still, through all this, no one asks how you're feeling. Because feelings don't matter. Function does. You learn to manage your periods with cloth rags and guesswork. There's no soap, no privacy, and often no fresh water. You wash what you can in icy basins behind the house, praying no one notices the stains on your hem. If they do, they'll mock you. Or worse, accuse you of tempting fate, inviting disease, or being loose. You begin to walk with your arms crossed over your chest. You hunch slightly to make your body look smaller. You start wearing an apron even when you're not cooking, an extra layer to hide what's happening underneath. And then comes the blood hut. In some villages, women are quietly sent to separate sheds or rooms during their periods, especially during childbirth, but sometimes even monthly. You're not locked away, exactly, but you're not welcome at the hearth either. People believe your bleeding could spoil food, curdle milk, or make crops fail. You're sitting in the corner of the shed one evening, swatting flies and listening to your stomach rumble. When it hits you, your body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your family, to your future husband, to the church. You're just the person trapped inside it. And the worst part? You don't know if this gets better. You ask your cousin. She's 16, recently married. She's pale, tired, and has a baby strapped to her chest. Does it stop being so scary, you ask? She gives a thin smile. No, but you get used to it. Outside, the village bell tolls for evening prayers. You wrap your shawl tighter and watch a spider crawl across the low ceiling. Somewhere in the dark, someone coughs. Probably your neighbor with the lung sickness. There's always someone dying. You think about running away. But where would you go? The forest, the convent. There's no Instagram to scroll through, no secret map to womanhood, just aching limbs, dried blood, and the long, lonely process of becoming invisible to yourself. You try to sleep, but your stomach cramps and the rags feel damp again. And through the thin wooden wall, you can hear the laughter of boys outside, playing with sticks, throwing mud, just existing. You don't remember the last time you felt that free. It happens fast, faster than you imagined. One day, you're still sneaking bites of raw dough and trying to remember if it's safe to sit under the walnut tree. The next, you're standing in a scratchy linen shift while older women whisper about your childbearing hips and your mother weeps quietly in the corner. You're being married off, just like that. You barely even know the man. Maybe he visited once, with his boots caked in manure and his beard hiding half his face. Or maybe you've never met him at all. Doesn't matter. What matters is that his field borders your father's, or he owns a cow, or your family owes him something they can't repay. In medieval Europe, marriage was often a business arrangement. Girls could be betrothed as early as age 7, and legally married by 12 in many regions. Love had little to do with it. These were transactions, sealed with handshakes and sometimes wine. Historians still argue whether peasant girls had any say in these matches. Some evidence suggests local custom allowed young women to resist unwanted proposals, but realistically, you try telling your father no when he's already bartered you for 3 sacks of barley and a borrowed donkey. The wedding isn't romantic, it's practical. A priest mutters Latin while a few curious villagers gather to gawk. Your hands are cold, your veil itches, and beside you stands your new husband, twice your age, grinning like he's won a prize. You force yourself to smile, or at least not to vomit. There's no white dress, no cake, no dancing under twinkly lights. You might get bread, cheese, and watered-down ale if you're lucky. And afterward, well, let's just say the wedding night is less about candlelit kisses and more about silent endurance. In some parts of medieval Europe, a newlywed couple's consummation was expected to occur with witnesses nearby, or just outside the room, to ensure it happened. Think about that next time someone romanticizes old-fashioned values. You're now officially a wife, which means your identity dissolves. You stop being you and become someone's property. You're the blacksmith's wife or Gervaise's woman. Your opinion is less relevant than your ability to produce strong sons and bake edible bread. Your days are longer now. You cook for 2, then 3, then 4. You keep the fire alive, the clothes mended, the animals fed. You wipe noses and spillages and handle your husband's moods like a nervous juggler. Does he hit you? Maybe. It's not illegal. In fact, it's expected that a man keeps his wife in line. You might get slapped for burning stew, for speaking too loudly, or for simply existing on the wrong day of the moon cycle. But no one will intervene, unless you scream loud enough to disturb the neighbors. And even then, it's a private matter. You think about your own mother now, how tired her eyes always were, how quickly she aged. You used to think she was distant. Now you understand she was just surviving. And heaven forbid you remain childless. A barren woman is a useless woman. People will whisper. Some may even accuse you of witchcraft, because clearly, if your womb isn't cooperating, it must be the devil's work. You try everything. Warm baths with mint, prayers to Saint Margaret, lying still for hours after the deed. Nothing guarantees anything. Childbirth is a coin toss, but your entire worth is riding on it. And still, no one asks what you want. You want freedom, maybe, or silence, or the chance to wake up without dread pressing on your chest like a stone. But those things don't belong to women, especially not wives, so you settle for something smaller, finishing your chores before dusk, a bite of warm bread with honey, a moment alone behind the house where you can breathe without being watched. One evening, as you kneel to scrub the floor, a thought creeps in. What if I just ran, took the donkey, and went 3 villages over, said I was widowed in a fire? It's not impossible, but it's also not smart. Women caught traveling alone are assumed to be beggars, or worse, prostitutes. And either label can get you arrested or dragged into the stocks. So instead, you keep your head down. You pray. You survive. You learn to speak with your eyes, to smile at the right time, to swallow resentment like dry bread. You become invisible in plain sight. And in a strange way, that invisibility protects you. If they don't see you, they don't punish you. If you're quiet enough, agreeable enough, maybe they'll leave you alone. But in the small hours of the night, when your husband snores and the coals glow low, you lie awake and wonder, is this all there is? Is this all there's ever been for us? The answer, you suspect, is yes. Morning light spills through the crooked window pane, as your eyes blink open to another day of being someone's wife. No alarm clock, just the sound of chickens, scratching, and your husband coughing up whatever medieval lung thing he's caught this week. You swing your legs over the bed, if you can call a wooden plank with hay a bed, and start your daily grind. Your knees crack, your back twinges. You're 20, maybe. You feel 50. Being a medieval wife isn't about affection or romance. It's about function, utility, output. Your husband expects food, children, and silence, preferably all at once. And if you're tired, if your womb aches, or your hands are raw from laundry, tough. No one cares. There's bread to bake and a chicken to pluck, and your youngest is crying again because he stuck his finger in the beeswax. Mainstream historical fact. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women in the Middle Ages. 1 in 3 women died from complications. There were no sterilized tools, no anesthesia, and often no professional help. Just a midwife with herbs and a prayer, hoping the baby doesn't get stuck. Your first birth happens in the corner of your home, while your husband waits outside and your sister wipes your forehead with a rag that smells like onions. You scream, you swear, you bleed. A lot. You bite down on leather and cry for your mother, and when it's over, they hand you a baby that feels both foreign and fragile, tiny lungs screaming into a world that has no idea how to protect it. You survive. Barely. But now your real work begins. Infants need constant attention. But there are no diapers, no wipes, no pacifiers. Just old cloth, your breast, and the occasional lullaby you hum while stirring stew with one hand and cradling your child with the other. Rest? That's for saints and royalty, not for women like you. And when the baby gets sick, and it will, you call the midwife again. She arrives with a sack of dried herbs and murmurs something about leeches. You try not to cry. You're supposed to be strong. And besides, crying makes your husband angry. Women's tears, he says, are a sign of weak faith. Fringe tidbit: some midwives in the Middle Ages believed that placing a pigeon on a woman's stomach during labor would ease pain. Others suggested chanting while chewing bits of parchment with prayers written on them. Science? Not exactly, but at least they were trying. Your body? It's never the same. Your back is crooked from carrying toddlers and water buckets. Your teeth ache from grinding grain. Your stomach stretches, deflates, stretches again. And still, you're expected to be attractive. Pleasant, as your neighbor calls it, while giving your hips a once-over. Sex isn't romantic. It's scheduled, or worse, demanded. There's no concept of consent in your marriage. You're a wife, and that's what wives do. If you resist, he might sulk, or get violent, or accuse you of witchcraft, which, fun twist, can lead to public shaming, fines, or worse. Historians still argue whether peasant women had any autonomy in their marital beds. Some sources suggest there were customs around mutual agreement, but those didn't stop a man from simply taking what was his. Your body is not your own. It's part of the marriage package, like the pig or the thatched roof. One evening, you sit by the fire with your sewing, and you hear your neighbor scream. Not in fear, in labor. The sounds rise and fall like waves. You've heard it a dozen times before. You try not to listen. Try to focus on the hem you're mending. Try to ignore the panic rising in your throat because you're pregnant again, and that'll be you in a few months, if you make it. The village doesn't mourn women loudly. If you die in childbirth, your husband might remarry before the body's cold. The priest will say you were blessed to bear children. Your kids will be passed to an aunt. Life rolls on. You're not sacred. You're replaceable. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, you remember what it was like to climb trees, to dance barefoot in the mud before your body became a battlefield. You remember what it felt like to run without pain, to laugh without caution, to sleep through the night. But those memories feel like someone else's life now. And yet, you keep going. Because you have to. Because no one will do it for you. Because the baby needs feeding. Because the bread is rising. Because the goats got out again. You pour water into the basin and see your reflection, tired, older than your years, but still here, still alive. For now, you'd think that after surviving childbirth, marriage, and life in a one-room cottage with 5 people and a goat, you might at least get some control over your own body. Ha! Welcome to the Middle Ages, where bodily autonomy is basically a myth and your uterus is everyone's business but yours. Doctors, priests, husbands, even strangers feel entitled to comment on your womb, whether it works, whether it's cursed, whether it's too hot or too cold, because yes, those were actual diagnoses. The medieval body was thought to be governed by the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And if your uterus was out of whack, clearly one of them had gone rogue. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was largely based on ancient Greco-Roman ideas, especially those of Galen. Women were often considered inferior versions of men, with internal organs that were simply the same parts, just inverted. You were quite literally a man turned inside out, which might explain why no one listened when you said you were in pain. One day, you mention a sharp ache in your side. The village healer presses a stinking poultice to your belly and mutters something about wandering womb syndrome. Apparently, if your uterus gets bored or emotional, it might just float around your body like a moody ghost, causing hysteria, melancholy, or excessive talking. Fringe tidbit? One recommended cure for a wandering womb was to lure it back into place using sweet-smelling herbs near the vagina, while burning foul-smelling things near the nose. You, essentially, are the world's saddest candlelit air freshener. You're also expected to stay fertile and pure, which is a tricky combination. Too few children. You're barren. Too many. You're careless. And if you're not married but still pregnant, oh no, that's when the town really turns on you. Because nothing says sinner like a woman with visible proof she didn't follow the rules. You're caught in an impossible web of expectations. Don't tempt men, but also please your husband. Don't speak too boldly, but teach your children to pray. Don't complain about pain, but bear children and survive the consequences with dignity. Meanwhile, your male counterparts are off fighting wars, joining guilds, or becoming monks. You've memorized every crack in the hearthstone, every sound a hungry baby makes, and every subtle change in your husband's mood that might signal a bad night ahead. You once had a toothache so severe you couldn't chew. When you finally told someone, the village healer said it was due to excessive moisture in the brain. The remedy: drilling a hole in the tooth and stuffing it with herbs, and, why not, boiled frog bits. Historians still argue whether medieval women believed these treatments helped or just accepted them out of desperation. Maybe it was both. When no one listens to your pain, you start to accept it as part of the background noise, like smoke from the hearth or the hum of flies on meat. And speaking of meat, your diet doesn't help. You get what's available, which usually means grain, root vegetables, and a lot of watery soup. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days or the nobility. Your teeth rot faster than your hopes. You try to clean yourself, but soap is expensive. Sometimes it's made with animal fat and lye, and it stings if you use it too often. Baths are infrequent and frowned upon. Some folks believe bathing opens your pores to demons. Others think it inflames your passions. Can't have that. But here's the real kicker. When things go wrong, when your body fails, when you collapse from a fever, when childbirth nearly kills you, guess who gets blamed? You do. Women are seen as naturally sinful. Thanks, Eve. The church teaches that your suffering is deserved, that pain purifies, that obedience to God and husband might earn you a place in heaven, but only if you bear it all in silence. You once knew a woman in the next village over. She was clever. She knew herbs, helped deliver babies, eased fevers. She was accused of witchcraft when a child died in her care. You never saw her again. You don't ask questions anymore. You don't experiment with remedies. You swallow your pain. You work through illness. You hold your tongue when your back screams at you, because complaining could mean gossip, and gossip could mean trouble. The worst part: you start to internalize it. You stop wondering why your life is like this, and start telling yourself it's just how things are. You become your own enforcer. You tell your daughters to stay quiet, to avoid eye contact, to cover their hair. Not because you want them to suffer, but because you're trying to keep them safe. You sip cold broth with shaking hands and count the days until you're next bleeding. Not because it's fun, but because if it doesn't come, you're either pregnant again or about to be accused of sorcery. Your body is not your own. It's a vessel, a tool, a battleground. And no one, not even you, is allowed to forget that. Let's talk about fashion, or as you now know it, pain, itchiness, and social surveillance disguised as fabric. There are no cute outfits in the Middle Ages, no soft loungewear or breathable pajamas. Every layer you wear has been spun, woven, stitched, and washed by hand, usually yours. If you're a peasant, your options are limited. Scratchy wool, rough linen, and belts so tight they might just move your organs around a little. It's summer, and you're sweating through your chemise. But modesty demands you stay covered, head to toe. Exposing your arms? Scandalous. Letting your hair loose? Practically an invitation for scandal, sin, and unsolicited sermonizing from the priest. Mainstream historical fact: women's clothing in medieval Europe was deeply symbolic. Covering your head was not just a custom, it was a requirement, especially for married women. Going out bareheaded could be seen as flirtatious or even immoral. The veil was less about fashion and more about morality. You wear a shift, basically a long underdress, a kirtle, the main dress, and sometimes an overdress on top of that. Each layer traps heat in summer and does a bad job of blocking cold in winter. And if you're noble, congrats, your clothes are fancier. but also heavier, more constrictive, and laced in ways that require a second person just to go to the bathroom. Fringe tidbit? In the 14th century, noblewomen sometimes wore corset-like belts made of metal or whalebone to shape their bodies. There's even a rumor that one French lady had her ribs reshaped by sleeping in a wooden beauty press. Historians still argue whether that's myth or just medieval wellness culture. You know what's not part of your wardrobe? Underwear. At least not in the modern sense. There's no such thing as a comfy pair of cotton briefs. Most peasant women went without. If you were lucky, you had a long linen shift to absorb the worst of it. If not, you did a lot of laundry, shoes, rough leather if you can afford them. More often it's wooden clogs or bare feet, in winter. On mud and ice. Your toes go numb so often, you start to wonder if that's just how feet are supposed to feel. Then there's grooming. No razors, no shampoo, no conditioner. You use soap made from animal fat and lye, and it smells like despair. Washing your hair is a chore, so you do it maybe once a month, if that. You comb it with carved wooden tools, pulling out tangles while wincing and whispering prayers under your breath. And God forbid you look too nice. If your dress is clean and your hair shiny, people gossip. She's trying to attract attention, they mutter. If you look haggard, they gossip again. She's letting herself go. You can't win. You're either a temptress or a troll. There is no middle ground. You learn to walk a line that no one defines but everyone enforces. Smile enough to seem polite, but not enough to seem interested. Keep your clothes neat, but not too fine. Speak clearly, but only when spoken to. One frayed hem or flushed cheek, and suddenly you're the star of the village rumor mill. Once, during a festival, a noblewoman rode through the square in a gown embroidered with gold thread. You still remember the way the fabric caught the light. It looked like magic. The other women clucked their tongues, but you felt something else, longing maybe. Not for the gold, but for the freedom to choose what you wear, to express something beyond utility and obedience. Because your clothes don't just protect your body, they control it. Tight laces remind you not to slouch. Long skirts trip you if you try to run. Covered hair hides your femininity. The belt around your waist presses against your ribs like a constant reminder. Be small. Be still. Be good. Even color is political. Rich hues like deep blue or crimson are for the wealthy. You wear brown, gray, or dull green. Not because you like them, but because that's what your family can dye from local plants without breaking the bank, or getting accused of dressing above your station. And yet, there are tiny rebellions. You add an extra stitch of embroidery to your sleeve. You tie your hair ribbon a little looser. You patch your dress with a fabric scrap that's just a bit too bright. It's not much, but it's yours. Sometimes, late at night, you take off the layers, one by one. Your shift clings to your skin, your feet ache. But for just a moment, you're not a wife, or a servant, or a subject. You're just you, in your body, in your skin. And in that moment, under the weight of a woolen world, you allow yourself a silent, fleeting thought. One day, I want to wear something that makes me feel free. The bells ring across the village, echoing off stone and soot. It's Sunday, again. You wrap your veil around your head, tug your sleeves over your wrists, and prepare for another sermon in which you're compared to Eve, told you are the root of temptation, and reminded yet again to obey your husband with a cheerful heart. You'd roll your eyes, but the priest is looking. Welcome to your spiritual life, where the church loves you, sort of. You're told you're precious in the eyes of God, but also deeply flawed. Sacred, but also dangerously tempting. Holy, but only if you're silent, obedient, and preferably invisible. Mainstream historical fact. The church was the most powerful institution in medieval Europe. It shaped laws, social customs, and daily behavior, especially for women. Female saints were held up as paragons of suffering and chastity, while Eve's disobedience was used to justify patriarchal control. And boy, do they love Eve. She gets name-dropped more than anyone. Everything wrong with the world? Her fault. Painful childbirth? Thanks, Eve. Lustful thoughts? Classic Eve. Your backache from chopping firewood for 6 hours? Somehow probably still Eve. The church gives you one honorable path outside of marriage, becoming a nun. But don't romanticize it. Nunneries aren't quiet libraries with soothing Gregorian chants and herbal tea breaks. They're often overcrowded, poorly funded, and strict. You still obey men, only now they wear robes and speak Latin. Historians still argue whether nunneries provided true liberation for women or just another set of chains. Some nuns wrote poetry, taught other women, even managed estates. Others spent their days scrubbing floors and being told their dreams were sinful. But hey, at least no one's trying to get you pregnant. If you're not a nun, your religious role is basically this: attend Mass, confess your sins, avoid being seductive, and keep your thoughts pure. You kneel on cold stone, mumbling prayers you only half understand, while the priest reminds the congregation that women are naturally more prone to sin. Why? Because your bodies bleed, swell, and sometimes experience pleasure, which is, frankly, suspicious. Fringe tidbit. There was a 13th century monk who claimed that even a woman's voice could tempt a man to sin, which is why some religious leaders believed women should stay completely silent during worship. Yep, your voice is dangerous. You're told to emulate the Virgin Mary, humble, silent, pure, and endlessly forgiving. Never mind that you live in a thatched hut and can't afford to skip chores for contemplation. You try to be like her, but mostly you just feel tired and guilty. There are saints too: Catherine, Claire, Margaret. Many of their stories involve suffering. They starve themselves, endure torment, resist marriage, or walk barefoot across ice. You're supposed to admire them, aspire to them. But part of you wonders, is being holy just a long, painful way to disappear? You confess your sins regularly. Sometimes you don't even know what they are, you just guess. I was prideful, I grumbled. I envied Sister Agnes's wool cape. The priest nods solemnly and gives you a penance. Say 3 Hail Marys, whisper prayers before dawn, fast for a day. You do it, because what if you don't? Hell isn't a metaphor, it's a real, terrifying place carved into your imagination with fire and brimstone. You've seen the illustrations: demons with horns dragging women down by their hair, eternal flames licking at the ankles of those who disobeyed their husbands or danced too freely at May Day. But heaven, that's harder to picture. You hope it's soft and silent, with clean sheets, and fruit that isn't shriveled, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to finally rest. Sometimes, you catch a glimpse of a different kind of faith. The village midwife mutters prayers while boiling herbs. Your neighbor leaves honey cakes on the windowsill for saints or spirits, depending on who's asking. These quiet rituals feel older, earthier, less judgmental, less male. But they're dangerous. You remember what happened to Margot, the woman who healed sick livestock and whispered to bees. When the blacksmith's daughter died, Margot was blamed. A trial followed. Rope, smoke, ashes. No one speaks her name anymore, except in warning. So you return to your pew, kneel when told, and fold your hands like you're supposed to. You wonder if God listens. You wonder if He cares. You wonder if He sees you, really sees you, scrubbing floors until your fingers crack, giving birth in a pool of blood, or biting your tongue when your husband stumbles home drunk and angry. You hope so. Because if He doesn't, what's the point? One evening, you sit outside the church after Mass. The sun dips low. The air smells like wet grass and candle smoke. You listen to the distant sound of sheep bells, and for a moment, something quiet flickers inside you. Faith, maybe. Or just the wish for something more. You don't know the words for it. You don't need to. You close your eyes and imagine a world where holiness doesn't mean suffering, where your worth isn't weighed in silence and scars. You whisper, not a prayer, but a promise to yourself. I am still here. I am still me. Even if the church forgets that. You keep your head down. You stir the pot, you mend the hem, you shuffle from mass to market with quiet steps and covered hair. But even all this piety won't save you if the wrong rumor starts. Because in the Middle Ages, it only takes a whisper to turn your life into ash. You grow herbs, nothing fancy, just thyme, yarrow, maybe a little mugwort for cramps. But someone sees you harvesting under a full moon, and suddenly you're suspicious. You treat your daughter's fever with warm vinegar and sage? Sorcery. You deliver your neighbor's baby, and it doesn't survive? Witchcraft. Mainstream historical fact. While the major witch hunts peaked later in the early modern period, suspicion and persecution of women labeled as witches existed in the Middle Ages, especially midwives, herbalists, and those who lived alone or had too much knowledge for a woman. Historians still argue how often women were actually executed in the medieval era versus later centuries, but one thing is clear. The seeds of fear were already planted. You're not allowed to be too clever, too confident, too independent. Those traits aren't admired in women. They're threatening. You're told to defer to male authority, priests, husbands, lords. If you know too much, or speak too boldly, or simply exist at the wrong time, someone will call you unnatural, dangerous, cursed. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed witches could steal a man's virility by tying knots in a cord and hiding it under his bed, which would honestly be kind of impressive if it weren't used to justify torture. You remember when it started for the last accused woman, Alda. She was quiet, unmarried, and had a way of coaxing milk from a cow when no one else could. Then one day, a child choked on a seed, and somehow it was Alda's fault. The priest called for inquiry. The crowd grew angry. You don't know what happened in that barn, but you know Alda never returned. It changes you, makes you quieter. You stop sharing your herb mixtures. You stop humming when you cook. You let people think you're dull, because dull is safe. You learn to survive in the space between truth and silence. There are tests for witchcraft, you hear. Throwing a woman into water. If she floats, she's guilty. If she sinks, she's innocent. And drowned. There's also pricking her skin to find the devil's mark. You wonder what they'd find on your back, where your spine curves from too much laundry, or under your arm, where a birthmark hides. You try not to think about it. But fear, once planted, spreads like mold. Your daughter is 7 now. She's bright-eyed, questions everything. You hush her gently. Not so loud, little one. You feel guilt even as you do it. But you know what happens to girls who talk too much? Girls who notice too much. Girls who shine. One day, the priest gives a sermon about temptation. He says that women are the gateway to the devil, and you glance around the pews, watching heads nod. No one challenges it. Why would they? This is what they've been taught their whole lives. And you realize something terrible. If anyone accused you, these people would probably believe it. You start hiding things, your dried herbs, your notes on midwifery, even the carved wooden charm your grandmother gave you. Just in case. It feels like erasing yourself, one secret at a time. You miss the days when you thought magic was something beautiful. The shimmer of fireflies, the hush of trees at dusk, the way your baby's breath steamed in the cold. But now, magic is something feared, prosecuted, buried, and yet, somewhere deep down, you still believe in it. Not the broomstick kind, but something quieter. The magic of resilience, of women who survive despite it all, of whispered knowledge passed from mother to daughter when no one else is listening. That's the kind of witch you'd be, if you dared. The kind who grows things, who heals, who watches the stars and remembers their names. But you don't say that aloud. You keep your hands busy. You keep your eyes lowered. You wait for the wind to change. And you pray not to be saved from evil, but from the people who claim they can see it. Winter bites harder this year. The firewood's running low, the bread's gone moldy, and your hands are cracked from washing clothes in freezing water. You wrap a shawl tighter around your shoulders, though the wind still finds its way through the cracks in the door. Illness starts creeping through the village like a shadow. First it's a sniffle, then a cough, then a death. You hear the bells toll twice before sunrise. You know that sound. You've heard it too many times. Your neighbor blames the new widow's bad luck. Others say it's punishment for sins. You know better. This isn't divine wrath. It's the same cycle every winter. Cold, poor diet, no medicine, and too many people crammed into tiny spaces breathing the same damp air. Disease was a constant threat in the Middle Ages. Outbreaks of the plague, dysentery, typhoid, and influenza wiped out entire villages. Medical knowledge was primitive, and treatments ranged from ineffective to downright harmful. You try to keep your family healthy. That means boiling water, burning herbs, whispering prayers over your children's foreheads. But you know how fragile life is. You've buried 2 already, 1 to fever, 1 before they even took a full breath. Grief doesn't get special treatment here. There are no therapists, no casseroles from neighbors. Just a quick prayer, a wooden marker, and then back to work. The animals still need feeding. The children still need soup. You hear gossip swirl like smoke. Someone says the midwife cursed a cow. Someone else says the priest is fasting to drive out the sickness. You wonder if anyone realizes that eating moldy rye bread might be part of the problem. Ergot poisoning, a fungus that grew on grain, could cause seizures, hallucinations, and even death. Some historians think it might have contributed to witch hysteria or even influenced the bizarre behavior during medieval famines. Food, by the way, is a never-ending worry. In good years, you might have a bit of cheese, maybe eggs, maybe enough to stretch through Lent. But bad years, you're soaking stale bread in weak ale and calling it dinner. Hunger is a companion. You learn to ignore it, like a pebble in your shoe you can't shake out. One day, the church bell rings again. This time, it's a child. Not yours, thank God, but someone you know. You press a hand to your stomach, half in mourning, half in fear. Because when illness hits one home, it rarely stops there. You do what you can. You hang sprigs of rosemary near the door. You scrub your hands with ashes. You tell your children to stay inside. But staying inside means nothing when your husband goes to market, when your neighbor comes calling, when someone coughs behind you at Mass. And then there's the midwife, old, hunched, eyes sharper than you'd expect. She's helped you twice now. You trust her, mostly. But you hear others whisper. They say she talks to herself, that her cat is always watching, that she uses herbs that smell wrong. You know the truth. She's saved more babies than anyone. She knows things the men don't, but her knowledge doesn't protect her. It marks her. And if the sickness gets worse, someone's going to point fingers. Historians still argue whether midwives were more trusted or feared in medieval communities. Some were deeply respected. Others were accused of witchcraft or blamed for infant deaths, regardless of their skill or compassion. You give the midwife a loaf of bread anyway, not just for the help, but as a quiet thank you. As a shield. You don't want her to go the way of Alda. And so you endure another winter. You cough. You pray. You wrap cloth around your children's feet and press your forehead to the window pane, watching snow fall like ash. You don't get to rest, even when you're sick. No one brings soup. No one tucks you in. You keep moving because you have to. Because if you stop, everything falls apart. And when your husband complains that the stew's too thin, you bite your tongue and nod. Because he doesn't know how close you came to losing your youngest last night. How long you stayed up, spooning broth into his mouth, checking his breathing every hour. You don't tell him. You just serve dinner. There's no glory in what you do. No record will be kept. No songs will be sung. But you carry your family on your back, quietly, constantly. And when the sun finally breaks through the clouds, when the first green shoots appear in the frozen ground, you allow yourself a deep breath. Spring is coming. And you're still here. The snow melts, the mud thickens, and your shoulders still ache. But the days are longer now, and with that comes one thing: more work. Spring means planting, weeding, repairing everything that winter broke: fences, buckets, spirits. You're up before the rooster, boiling porridge with one hand while hoisting a toddler on your hip. Before you've even swallowed your breakfast, someone needs something: clean rags, fresh water, help with a sick you, though, of course, you're last on that list. And in case you forgot, you're still not getting paid. Mainstream historical fact: medieval women did essential labor: spinning, weaving, brewing, baking, farming, midwifing, yet were routinely paid less than men, if they were paid at all. Their work was often considered part of their household duty, not an economic contribution. You work constantly. You spin wool into thread, which is slow and endless and makes your fingers numb. You tend gardens, pluck chickens, scrub linens on wooden boards until your back seizes up. You don't have weekends. You don't get holidays off. You don't even get a pat on the back, unless it's someone telling you to move faster. Historians still argue whether women's labor was truly invisible or simply undervalued by male scribes who didn't see household work as real labor. Either way, no one writes down how many hours you spend bent over a wash basin or mending socks by candlelight. You think of the boys in the village, apprentices, blacksmiths, tanners. They earn coins, learn trades, go to taverns. You learn how to stretch barley, how to bleach cloth with stale urine, how to remove lice from a child's scalp with a hot comb and prayers. Fringe tidbit: in some towns, it was technically illegal for women to sell ale unless they were married or widowed. But in practice, many women ran taverns or sold home-brewed beer until their success threatened men, who'd then accuse them of dishonest practices or witchcraft. Because, of course, you've thought about opening a little stall, selling extra herbs, or maybe rushlights dipped in tallow, but as soon as you earn a few pennies, someone asks why your husband allows it. Then the church tax collector shows up. Then the rumors start. Best to keep your ambition tucked beneath your apron. You do get praise sometimes, when your pies don't burn, when your baby doesn't cry during Mass, when your house smells faintly of rosemary instead of sheep. But it's always framed as, she's a good wife. Never just, she's good. You are your role, not your person, and the toll it takes, you feel it. In your bones, in your sleep, you wake sometimes unsure of what day it is. Not because you're forgetful, but because the days blur, same tasks, same weather, same sigh. And when the village feast arrives, you still work. Maybe you roast meat, maybe you serve ale, maybe you scrub the floors after everyone's gone home, humming under your breath while your husband snores in a corner. You watch the boys toss stones in a game, laughing like life is one long midsummer afternoon. You envy them. Not their games, but their ease. Their freedom to be unseen when they want to be, and noticed only when it suits them. You once dreamt of writing, scratching stories into parchment, composing songs, recording recipes. But ink is expensive. So are dreams. Instead, you whisper stories into your daughter's ear while she braids your hair. You draw flowers in the ashes of the hearth. You remember. You endure. And sometimes, when the breeze shifts just right, and the evening light turns gold across the field, you allow yourself to believe this isn't all you are. Because work without rest erases people. But somehow, you're still here. Not erased. Just worn. And tomorrow, you'll rise again before the sun. Not because you want to. Not because it's fair, but because everything depends on you holding the center together. Even if no one thanks you, maybe you've wondered, what if I'd been born into a noble family? A lady with soft hands and velvet dresses and sweetmeats on silver plates. Don't get too excited. Being noble doesn't mean being free. It just means your prison has stone walls and nicer curtains. You wake in a featherbed, yes, but one you share with 2 sisters and a maid who listens to your every breath. Your hair is brushed with combs of bone, your dresses laced tight enough to stop your lungs, and your life is a series of carefully choreographed appearances, meals, mass, embroidery circles, and endless lessons in how to be quiet, modest, and useful. Even royal and noble women in the Middle Ages were rarely free to make choices. Their marriages were arranged for political gain, their movement was restricted, and their public roles were heavily controlled by male relatives, often from childhood. Your parents already decided your future when you were 5. Maybe you're to marry the son of a powerful lord, maybe a foreign prince, maybe a widower with questionable hygiene but valuable sheep. Love, that's for troubadours. You'll be lucky if you exchange 2 full sentences with your future husband before the vows. And if you think childbirth scary in a straw hut, imagine doing it in a cold stone tower with no heat, no privacy, and the added pressure of producing a male heir or else. You've got midwives with honeyed water, yes, but also courtiers waiting outside to hear if the baby cries in a boy tone. Historians still argue whether noble women had more access to medical care or just better gossip, because often it was still herbs, hot stones, and guesswork. Maybe a physician if your family's rich, but he might be bleeding your arm with a dull knife while quoting Aristotle. Queen Joan of England died of the Black Death on her way to marry the Prince of Castile, an arranged marriage to secure political alliance. She never made it. Just one example of many noble women used like chess pieces and lost just as easily. Your castle might have more food than a village, but your options are narrower. You can't walk to the market. You can't visit a friend without an escort. You can't even write letters without someone reading them over your shoulder. Privacy doesn't exist. You are a symbol of your family's honor, always watched, always judged, and sure, you have silk gowns, but they itch, and they're heavy, and someone else chooses them. You spend hours each day just being presentable. Imagine getting blisters from standing still. Education, if you're lucky, means learning to read religious texts, play the lute, and maybe, write a decent poem. But write too well, that's suspicious. Cleverness is a double-edged sword. One wrong metaphor, and you're branded dangerously learned. You know stories of noble women locked away for too much influence, for writing, for whispering, for having opinions. One queen gets accused of adultery, another of poisoning. Another simply falls out of favor and ends her days in a drafty convent with nothing but her rosary and a few dead spiders for company. And if you're royalty, it's worse. Imagine being 11 and handed to a man twice your age so that 2 kingdoms can avoid a war. You're told it's your duty, your prayers, your fertility, your ability to smile at banquets without screaming, all political tools. You're both pawn and prize. You might wear a crown, but it weighs as much as any yoke. You've read about Eleanor of Aquitaine, bold, clever, fierce. She was queen twice, a political force. And she still got imprisoned for years by her husband when she stepped out of line. Even power couldn't save her from patriarchy's grip. So yes, noble girls might avoid the mud and muck of peasant life. They might die with smoother hands. But their cages are gilded, and the rules they live by are etched into the stone walls of castles. One day you see a peasant woman walking with a basket of onions, her face flushed, hair loose from her veil. She hums, free to move, free to walk where she wants. You envy her. And somewhere, maybe she sees you too, riding past in a carriage, stiff and silent, guarded on all sides. She envies you. Neither of you knows the full weight the other carries. Because in this world, womanhood is hard currency, spent early, often without permission, and rarely returned with interest. You rise before the sun again. Another morning, another round of chores, another handful of oat mush and responsibilities that never shrink. And just once, you wonder, what if I did something fun? Because if you're a medieval woman, fun is rationed, laughter is monitored, and play? That's for children, and even they get scolded for it. You look around and realize your life is rules stacked on rules, embroidered with expectations and hemmed with guilt. Fun is not encouraged. It's tolerated if it doesn't interfere with virtue. Most medieval leisure activities for women were limited to what was considered appropriate for their station: spinning circles, religious processions, storytelling, or, if noble, genteel games like chess or embroidery competitions. Physical games or raucous public fun were seen as inappropriate, even shameful. Your husband and the village boys gathered to play a rough ball game in the fields, basically medieval soccer, but with fewer rules and more bruises. You'd love to join. Just one kick. But women aren't invited to games like that. You sit on a rock and pretend to watch the geese instead. Historians still argue whether women secretly played more often than records suggest. After all, most written history comes from male clerics, and frivolous women weren't worth chronicling. But even if you did sneak in a game, you'd better not get caught. You'd be scolded, or worse, called immodest. You try embroidery. It's meditative, sure. But you're not stitching what you want, just religious scenes, or borders for your husband's tunic. You try singing. Then someone tells you to keep your voice down. You'll stir up trouble with that tone. You once laughed, really laughed, when your goat chased a bishop's hat across a field, and for days afterward, people gave you that look, like joy was contagious, and you were spreading it without permission. In some parts of medieval Europe, women were forbidden to dance on holy days because it was believed that devils joined them in the steps. Imagine being so fun that hell itself RSVPs. There are festivals, yes. May Day, harvest feasts, saints' days. Those are your best chances at something resembling happiness. You can wear a ribbon in your hair, maybe share a dance if the priest isn't glaring. But even there, fun is regulated. No spinning too fast, no drinking too freely, no laughing too loudly. You get the message. Fun is dangerous. Joy makes you visible, and visibility makes you vulnerable. Your daughter once asked to climb a tree. You hesitated. You wanted to say yes, but instead you said, "Girls don't do that." And as she walked away, you felt like you'd killed something small and bright inside her. But what choice do you have? You've seen what happens to women who don't behave. The ones who sing too loudly, flirt too openly, dance too wildly. They become stories, warnings, ashes. You sit at the edge of the field, watching your sons run while your daughter learns to hem, and you ache. Because somewhere inside you is a version of yourself who still wants to jump, who wants to swing from tree branches, who wants to toss her head back and howl at the stars without fear of judgment or punishment. But that version lives behind your eyes now, not in your body. So instead, you make your own tiny rebellions. You tell stories while kneading bread. You whisper riddles while gathering eggs. You steal a second helping of honeyed figs during Lent and smile to yourself like you've just won a secret war. Fun becomes subtle, quiet, rebellious in its smallness. Because the world won't give it to you, you have to make it. Even if it's just for 5 minutes, in the glow of the hearth, while the rest of the house sleeps, and you allow yourself to laugh, softly, to no one, because the goat got into the laundry again and dragged your husband's underclothes into the street. And in that moment, for just a breath, you're not a wife or a vessel or a cautionary tale. You're you, and you're alive. You've done everything right, or at least everything that was expected of you. You've cooked, cleaned, birthed, obeyed, survived. You've stitched until your fingers bled and kept your children alive on food that barely qualifies as food. You've prayed when you didn't believe, smiled when you wanted to scream, and disappeared into your duties like smoke into the rafters. But every so often, you hear about women who didn't. Women who said no, who pushed back, who rewrote the story, even if only for a moment. Mainstream historical fact, while rare, there were medieval women who resisted their assigned roles. Some were rebels, others saints, poets, abbesses, or outspoken heretics. Their names were often erased or distorted. but their existence cracked the idea that all women were silent, submissive shadows. You think of Joan of Arc, a teenage girl who wore armor and led armies. Who said God spoke to her? She was burned for it, of course, but not before shaking a kingdom to its roots. Historians still argue whether Joan was a true visionary or simply a political tool. But to women like you, she was proof that fire couldn't erase every voice. You hear stories, too, whispered around the bread ovens, of a woman who left her husband and ran away with a traveling musician, of another who refused to marry at all and lived alone with goats and books, of one who slapped a priest for calling her wicked and then vanished into the woods. Fringe tidbit. In 14th century Italy, there were women known as Sante Vive, living saints, who lived outside of convents, refused marriage, and dressed in male clothing. Some were revered, others feared. All were watched. You think of Hildegard of Bingen, who wrote music and books and letters in Latin, scolding bishops and composing songs that still echo in monasteries today. You think of Julian of Norwich, whose visions were so profound, her words still whisper through the centuries, "All shall be well." Not all resistance looks like rebellion. Sometimes it's quieter. A woman who teaches her daughter to read. A widow who refuses to remarry. A girl who writes poems in the margins of religious texts, tucked between prayers like seeds in soil. You remember your grandmother, how she used to sing lullabies that weren't from church, but older, stranger, sadder. She called them songs for remembering. You didn't understand then. You do now, because remembering is resistance, passing on knowledge, holding stories that weren't meant to survive. You wonder how many women were erased, how many voices were lost, how many bright minds dimmed because they were born in the wrong time, with the wrong anatomy, in a world designed to silence them before they could begin. But some slipped through, not because the world let them, but because they insisted. You begin to notice the small ways others resist too. Your friend who reads Psalms too confidently, the midwife who refuses to charge the poor, the teenage girl who questions the priest and doesn't flinch when he frowns. There's strength in that. It makes you stand a little straighter when you stir the pot. It makes you look your husband in the eye when he asks what's for dinner. It makes you start a new story, just for yourself, in your head as you sweep the floor. One where you live by the sea, where you eat figs every day and swim without clothes, and no one tells you to cover your hair. You don't tell anyone, not yet, but the story grows, and maybe one day you'll tell it to your daughter. Maybe she'll add her own chapters. Maybe her daughter will write them down. Maybe they'll survive. Maybe you will too. The years slip past like fog on the river. Your body bends more now. Your hands are rougher. Your steps slower. The children are older. Some gone, some married, one buried. The cottage still leans slightly to the left, and the fire still smokes like it's tired too. You sit on the stool by the hearth and realize you've survived. Not just once, but 1,000 times over. Through fevers, through births, through winters with no shoes and summers with too much grief. Through hunger, through back-breaking work, through fear that wrapped itself around your ribs and held tight. In the Middle Ages, if a woman reached old age, say beyond 50, she was seen as something of a rarity. She was often both respected and feared, especially if she had no husband. Her knowledge could be valuable or threatening. You've seen both sides of that. Some neighbors come to you now for advice, how to brew fever tea, how to soothe a colicky baby, how to cure a cracked heel. Others give you wary glances if your voice sounds too confident. You don't care anymore. You've learned that quiet rebellion is the kind that endures. You've carried stories in your bones. You've hidden songs between spoonfuls of stew. You've kept something yours, even when everything else belonged to someone else. In some areas of medieval Europe, widowed women were allowed more freedom, owning property, running businesses, speaking in court. But they were also at greater risk of suspicion, especially if they lived alone or didn't remarry. You're not a widow yet, but you sometimes wonder what it would be like. Peaceful, maybe. Lonely, definitely. Free, You're not sure you'd know what to do with freedom if it arrived at your door. Still, you dream sometimes. In the late hours, when the children are sleeping and your breath slows and your back sinks into the creaky mattress stuffed with straw, you imagine a world where women don't have to earn rest by bleeding or breaking. Historians still argue whether medieval women ever had true moments of joy. But you know the truth. You found joy in the pockets of the day, in the steam rising from a fresh loaf of bread, in the moment a child stopped crying, in a melody hummed softly while shelling peas, in holding your daughter's hand as she took her first steps, in the sly grin you gave your friend after the priest's sermon ran too long and your stomach growled so loud it made someone sneeze. Joy wasn't loud, it wasn't safe, but it was yours. And now, as you sit beneath the sky, watching the moon rise over the fields, you think of everything you've endured. Not just you, but every woman who came before, every woman who will come after. A line of backs bent by duty but unbroken by it. 1,000 lifetimes stitched together by invisible thread. You wonder if they'll remember you. Maybe not by name, but maybe, just maybe, your stories will echo. In lullabies, in recipes, in warnings, in whispered jokes and warm hands and long, tired sighs of women who keep going, because the world gives them no other choice, and they refuse to let that be the end. You press your hands into your lap. You look at them, calloused, capable, still here. So now, let your breath slow. Let the weight of that world fall away, one piece at a time. No more ash-filled hearths, no more scratchy linen or creaky boards underfoot. Just stillness, just warmth. Imagine soft grass beneath your bare feet, no skirts to trip you, no eyes to watch you. You walk freely now, past the fields, past the village, into the quiet woods where no one calls your name unless you want them to. The wind is gentle. The air smells like sage and warm bread. A cat you once loved rubs against your ankles, purring like you're the only thing that matters. And for the first time, you feel light. You're not a wife or a daughter or a laborer or a saint. You're not defined by who you served or what you bore or how quietly you suffered. You're just you. A woman who endured the impossible. A woman who dreamed even when the world tried to stop her. A woman who made it, through every rule, every scar, every silence, and came out the other side with something still glowing at her core. Let that glow carry you now.